Joining me now in the studio is Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott. Minister Philpott, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
This is a big day, but I'm gonna cut to the chase and ask you. This is legislation. It's very important legislation. We'll talk about the tabling of the legislation, but concretely, for children at risk, Indigenous children at risk, what difference would this legislation make?
Well, this has to do with the severe overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the foster care system. And we heard from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across the country that they want federal legislation that establishes the principles based on the rights of these children and the rights of Indigenous people to have their own laws, their own principles over which they will care for their children. So it includes things like not discriminating against families who might be too poor or who might have inadequate housing or have untreated health issues. And the way the system works now is those kids are apprehended, taken away from their families, usually put in non-Indigenous foster homes, and the trauma that leaves on both that child and their family is inestimable.
Okay, I heard you say that at the press conference, but it does raise the question then, if you're not going to automatically remove a child because of situations of poverty or abuse, what difference does this legislation make to children at risk because of poverty, health conditions, or abuse?
Well, this legislation is part of a broader, comprehensive package of reforms that's trying to say, what can we do to prevent the apprehension of children? The way the system is designed at the moment, for the most part, incents apprehension. Money flows according to how many kids are taken away, and that money flows not to the families where the child belongs, but it flows to other foster families, most often non-Indigenous. If we were to shift that focus, and we already are, by putting money into preventing the apprehension of children. What is it you need to be supported? You or your family. It's not always just the parents. Sometimes there's an auntie or a grandmother who wants to take away the child or who wants to take care of the child. How can we support you? Maybe the child is being taken away because they have a disability that can't be looked after in their community. And in the past, we've just taken those kids away from their families, sent them off to a big city to be cared for by someone else. Well, under some of the new resources we have, like Jordan's principle, we say, no, let the child stay with their family. If there are challenges in caring for that child with disabilities, let's get the resources to the family to keep them together, because we know that that is in the best interest of that child and that family in the long run.
If this legislation then spells out a priority to First Nations and Indigenous groups to make those decisions, I'm assuming that's what the legislation is about, does that mean it would preclude any other agencies from deciding, like provincial agencies, that the ultimate decision-making power would always be for the Indigenous community? Or Indigenous-run community services?
The thing about self-determination or control over your future that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have the right to exercise is that they might choose to exercise it in different ways. So some may continue to prefer to work with whatever Child and Family Services agency is in their community. But I hear from communities across the country, there are many First Nations communities in British Columbia, for example, who say, we want to write our own laws and we want to take care of our own kids. And they've already done a lot of that work. And this will then say clearly in federal law that where First Nations have a law in place, that it actually prevails and that they are going to exercise that work.
I'm going to throw a quote back at you, which you used this morning. You were asked about, okay, so what about the other side of it, the provinces? I mean, these children are in provincial agencies, and you said there is, quote, various states of enthusiasm for this initiative from the provinces. What does that mean?
Well, I've had really positive conversations with the provinces and territories. I had one big meeting with ministers from all of the provinces and territories, and then I've had several one-on-one meetings as well. And everyone knows this is a problem. In fact, most of the provinces are working on trying to change their own laws because the system is dysfunctional as it stands right now. It's not working. We have to change the incentives and the model of how this works. But more importantly, we have to make sure that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are in the driver's seat. And I think that provinces get that. They will, of course, there will be some complicated discussions about what that's going to look like and how it's going to roll out. It's not going to magically change overnight. But they know that the evidence is there. These kids, if we keep doing this, we will keep leaving these children on a path that's going to take to them some very adverse outcomes in their lives.
Okay, the big question is, this is going to be tabled next year because Parliament is going to be rising in about a week and a half. This won't be tabled until next year. Do you have any confidence whatsoever that this bill, this legislation, would pass before an election in the fall?
I have a great deal of confidence in that, and the reason I say so is because we want to table it as quickly as we possibly can when we come back in the new year. This is something that I think will be broadly supported. Certainly it's something that First Nations, Inuit and Métis have been asking for decades. I've had many conversations with the senators, including of course Senator Sinclair, who included an ask for this kind of legislation as one of the top calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think there will be significant support for this work, and we'll certainly try to move it along and get it passed.
What about in the House, though? I mean, you need to have cooperation at committee stage in the House. That could bog down very easily.
You know what? It could. This is about keeping families together. Who can be opposed to keeping families together? That's exactly the kind of conversation that we're going to have. Everybody knows that supporting strong bonds of family and helping kids to stay in their culture is one of the most important things that we should be able to do as policymakers. So I hope we'll get strong support.
All right, this is just the first step in the legislative process. We will speak to you later as it makes its way through Parliament. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.